Tuesday, March 21st, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. Corey, you want to remind me to call the roll?
No, you haven't missed it yet, so.
Oh, all right.
Go ahead.
Okay, like to call the roll.
Corey Evans here.
Jean Haley Nichols here.
All very present.
Jack Creighton present. And Diane Kennedy is on her way. We expect her to be joining us later. Like to invite everyone, if they wish to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tonight's meeting will be live. However, portions of it will be on Zoom, so I want everybody to remember that it's live streamed. It's also on Cohasset 143 and on Cohasset Facebook page. The only ones who can participate from the audience remotely are on the Zoom, in which case you just raise your hand and you'll be recognized, be allowed to speak. All votes taken at this meeting will be by roll call unless Diane joins us in present, in which case they will be as a normal taken. Before you speak, you must state your full name and address. We normally begin the meeting with allowing the public to make comments. We are going to forego that temporarily because we are going to go into executive session to consider the purchase, exchange, lease, or value of real estate if the chair declares that an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body. The board will receive an update on a potential property acquisition, and the chair so declares. Chair would entertain a motion to go into executive session.
Make the motion to go into executive session.
Second.
Have a motion made and second to go in executive session. Roll call vote.
Corey Evans, aye. Already, aye.
Jean Haley Nichols.
Jack Creighton, aye. We are now in executive session. Good evening. We are reopening the Cohasset Select Board meeting of Tuesday, March 21st, 2023. We opened it earlier, then we went into an executive session, and we are now back in session. Just a reminder, this is on 143 and streamed on Facebook. If you're on those, you cannot participate. This is also on Zoom. If you go to the town website, you will find the Zoom click in formula, so you can do that, and then you can ask questions. Anybody who asks questions has to give their name and address. Moving forward, so anybody who has any public comments? Justin, is there anybody?
No, Mr. Chair, I don't have anybody else.
We have no, okay. Okay, now we have the Affordable Housing Trust and the CPC Trust Agreement. We're going to discuss that in vote.
We're gonna actually adjourn that. The Affordable Housing Trust hasn't voted yet on this agreement. It's not, we thought they would be ready by tonight, but it's, so apologies.
Okay, so next we're moving on to major capital projects to be presented and proposed financing plan for the annual town meeting and town election. We have a lot of things that we're going to be discussing, and to give you some ideas, we have whatever we're going to do with town hall. We have some questions about what will be done with the schools for getting information for planning. We have fields to discussion about what we may or may not want to do on that and how we're going to fund it. We have roads and sidewalks, and we have the public safety buildings, the police and fire. All these are major projects which are most likely in pretty dire need of being addressed, and this will require town meeting warrants. And if the warrants pass, then they have to go to the ballot to be voted on, and they all potentially involve increasing the taxes. So when we add them all up, we could have, there's a lot of potential needs, and that could very seriously impact the taxes that all of our taxpayers pay for their homes. Being said, who would like to, Jane, do you want to speak to some of the things?
I would suggest we start with the schools. We have a member of our school facilities committee here. He's also on the school committee. I think that I'm not sure if there's anyone in the audience right now that also wants to participate.
Mr. Dial.
Okay,
Okay,
okay, great.
so Craig, why don't you take over and introduce yourself to everybody, and Lance and Dr. Sullivan.
Thank you. My name is Craig McClellan. I reside at 8 Rustic Drive, and I am here in my capacity as a member of the School Facilities Committee, as well as a member of the School Committee. And I also serve on the Long-Term Financial Planning Committee. Thank you for having us, and thank you to the Select Board, especially certain members, for your ongoing collaboration on all things related to the schools. We appreciate it. I appreciate your support. With me is the chairperson of the school committee, Mr. Lance Dial, and our superintendent of schools, Dr. Patrick Sullivan.
Great. So would you like us to, I guess, Craig, do you want to jump in? Do you want me to jump in? How do you want to?
Since Mr. Dial, for you to start, and then I'll come on board later.
Great. So my thanks as well to the select board. My name is Lance Dial. I'm at 21 Rocky Lane in Cohasset, and I'm here also in my capacity as the chairman of the school committee, as well as a member of the Cohasset Financial Planning Committee. Mr. Chairman, you correctly identify that the town has significant amounts of needs and has a significant amount of potential funding issues coming up. And those funding issues will require more resources for all of our parts of our town. I'm focusing tonight on the schools, in my capacity as the chairman of the school committee. Our schools need help, and it's not a question of whether we should do these things. It's a question of when they should these things. And my understanding is up for consideration tonight is a special stabilization fund for capital projects for the schools that would allow a fixed sum to be allocated to that special stabilization fund each year. And then after approval through town meeting, the schools could elect to spend that money on capital projects that the school needs. And so I've come prepared to talk about a few of those needs that the school has. And I'm just going to give you a very brief highlight, given the hour and given the clear needs for the schools. We commissioned an existing conditions study. And the existing conditions study found that we have very significant needs for our schools, ranging from old technology, something as banal as the analog clock system, all the way up to very significant structural issues with roofs and walls. And I'll give you some examples from that. We have an estimate of $5 to $7 million need for roofs, an estimated $3.5 to $4.5 million for new windows to replace cracked and foggy windows. One of the walls in the middle high school needs a new mortar and repointing. And I'll confess, I had to learn what repointing was, but it's a very important thing that keeps the walls standing. So these are not limited needs. We also have needs for other schools as well. The Deer Hill School has specific needs, as well as Osgood. Osgood has needs that are in addition to what we've identified in our existing conditions study, which includes certain security enhancements, as well as an examination of an exploration of some of the runoff coming off the front of the building and that's potentially sinking the sidewalk in front of the building. We have needs for roads and sidewalks within the school properties, and the list goes on and on. And what we are requesting is this special stabilization fund to be funded in the amount of $1.5 million every year. It doesn't solve everything, but it's a start. It's a down payment. It allows us flexibility to move things forward on a capital improvement pace, and allows us to start ensuring that our buildings don't get worse, as we've seen with other projects where significant capital needs are not met. And so with that, I'll yield the floor and see if there are any questions or concerns, or if Mr. McClellan would like to add anything.
You don't wish to add, I think you sufficiently summarized the issue for everyone, Mr. Dow. Happy to also join you in answering questions if there are.
Members of the
I have
Diane.
I have a couple of kind of clarification questions that I've probably asked 500 different times, and Jennifer, I'm probably going to be looking to you for the answer. It's not to you or Lance. It's so compelling, and one of the interesting things is, I remember when the Alternative Energy Committee was formed, probably 10 years ago. One of the first sites that we looked at for the panels was on top of the school buildings, and the reason, and the school committee was very active in alternative energy. And I apologize, they probably still are. But at the time, that was the plan. And it was, the reason we didn't do that was because we knew the roofs were gonna have to be replaced, like imminently. That was 10 years ago. So, I think, Mr. Dial kind of summarized none of the stuff we're going to be talking about tonight is wishes or trying to create some slush funds. It's really, we have massive critical infrastructure problems across the board that we have ignored, and we have to do something about it. One of the questions I just have with, again, the special stabilization fund and how it works. So let's say we put $1.5 million a year into this special stabilization fund specifically for school capital projects. The schools are best, for the most part, and the facilities department are best tasked with figuring out what the priorities are for that particular need. And I would assume, because the actual approval of the use of that money, it would still go through the same process that it does now, which is the schools to decide that we've got $1.5 million this year. These are our 3 or 4 priorities. And then they would go through the capital budget advisory board and then town meeting. Is that correct? How that process would work?
I would assume that it would work the same way it does now. So once the money is transferred into the fund, it would still go through the same approval process through capital committee, the capital projects committee, making recommendations. I know I've spoken with Brian Post about that, and And he would, definitely support, if we want that the same process staying in place.
In other words, just to clarify for everybody at home and watching. The money gets appropriated and you kind of earmark it and say that's for the schools. But when it comes to actual spending, then it has to be reapproved and the money has to be assigned. The beauty of a stabilization fund is that everybody knows that that is money the town has agreed to spend on the schools. And by the way, the same thing can be used for other needs. You set a fund aside, you don't know all the details how you're going to spend it, but you want to know that you agreed to spend it. And then when it comes time to spend it, there's a designated authority which will say yes, and that's generally a public approval process. Is that fair, Jennifer?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. No, I'm sorry, Corey.
No, I mean, I support this idea, this methodology 100%. I mean, we are falling behind. This doesn't get us in 1 year where we need to be. But if you look at this, if you look at the list, you look at the hyper, 3 or 4 years, we make significant progress. I think all progress has to be incremental. And if we understand that the discussion about the Cohasset Middle High School is going to be a bigger conversation, this gets us some momentum to have that conversation as well. I think this is the right mechanism. I think that the $1.5 million, I mean, I wish we could get more, but it's just how it is. I think that gets us, that's enough money to get some significant process being made. It's okay, ask from the taxpayer, as far as I'm concerned, for their contribution. I support this mechanism and this way to do it 100%.
Jane?
So one of the questions the board had last week was, what is our existing capital spend on the schools and how would this stabilization fund play off against that? So I asked Michelle to pull some numbers for us, backwards and forwards, and also look at the AI3 report request as well, which is the existing condition study that Mr. Dial referenced. So just for everyone's edification, the numbers that I see on the school tab of the 10-year capital plan. Back in 2022, the schools requested 1.2 million, they got 834. In 2023, they requested 949, they got 545. And this is a reflection, I think, in part of back and forth, but also that there's not enough money in our existing capital stabilization fund to address the ongoing needs. Now, looking forward, if you look at school capital requests, FY 2024 to 2030, on average, they're at 1.3 million based on what we have on the 10-year capital plan right now. And so this is the information before the existing condition study. If you add in the existing condition study information, that's an additional 2.3 million on average each year that we will be looking at in terms of school capital budget requests. So I bring this up to show, one, that there's certainly a need, even if we were, for example, to say, okay, you know, maybe we can try to manage through 75% of all of the existing capital requests and be able to take care of things. We're looking at on average of $3.6 million in requests each year, potentially. Now, some of that might be a little bit duplicative in terms of the roofs, but we did want to pull the numbers to see what it looked like. I think one thing that we all need to be mindful of is if we create the fund, the school fund, then what is likely going to happen is all of the school requests are going to be allocated against that fund first, which is what I would expect. And then with respect to the capital stabilization fund, if there's additional demands for that year, because remember, we still have a $2 million capital stabilization fund for the entire town, I would expect that we would all work together to meet those unmet needs, but we would first hit the school stabilization fund for capital and then go. So for example, if we're talking about the roofs, you know, that's going to be a big investment, we're probably gonna ask for help, I would imagine, from the state for that, if they're going in that direction. So again, the point is that we've got the numbers both on the 10-year plan and the existing condition study to merit this. And the benefit here is that if we're doing, let's say on average, anywhere from around $1 million in existing school capital needs, we're building in an additional 500 each year, and likely more that's going to come out of a capital stabilization fund as we start to hit some of the bigger projects. So I would expect our capital stabilization fund to still be contributing to school needs on an as needed basis. So I think it's important that we just make that clear in terms of what the select board's intent is, that this isn't the one and only source of school capital, because even if we do this extra 1.5 million, it is not necessarily going to be sufficient as we look at the needs over the years.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a remark?
Yes.
So one condition of our request here, and Ms. Dippold did allude to this, but I do want to make a clarifying point, is that this fund is in addition to and not replacing our existing capital requests. It is the plan of the schools, if this fund were to be proposed, to continue to make capital requests through the traditional capital stabilization fund, in addition to the special stabilization fund. We would use the special stabilization fund as a way to augment and address some of the already failing needs that we have. But we do have traditional capital expenditures that will come year over year over year. And this would be in addition to that. If it were the other way, where this is a replacement of that, then we're back to right where we are, and we're not having the flexibility to be able to add any additional capital to bringing our schools up to where they need to be and addressing some of these capital issues.
Thank you. Corey?
No, I mean, Lance, I was just gonna phrase, that's my expectation. It will make it a little more challenging because there'll have to be a discussion about what's coming out of the special stabilization fund and what is over that, but that's, I think as a policy, I think that's the understanding.
Diane?
So agreed. I think it needs to be, to the extent that it's possible, additive. I mean, the capital stabilization fund itself has been underfunded, so this is augmenting capital in general and specifically for the schools. I would highly strongly recommend, should this pass and get through everything, that the select board create a policy. I mean, this is the policy board, and we need to affirm that for our committees that are doing the review and for our staff that's building the budgets. So that's certainly my intent, that this would be additive.
Jane?
I would suggest that we probably want to do a policy in advance, so people know exactly what we're intending, and making it contingent on the passage of the plan.
Well, wait a minute.
Sorry.
Paul?
No, I didn't have my hand up.
Okay.
Well, thoughts about, maybe somehow crafting a policy which is based on the 10-year weighted average of previous spends. So then that's just to set expectation that is calculable, that, the last 10 years were, it should be within the same range. Is that possible? Something like that?
Yeah.
I don't know if we can hard code it, but I think there has to be some sort of.
Well, Paul, and then Diane, did you want to speak as well?
I just have a question. So we're putting away 1.5 million now. If we need, Mr. Dial is saying, so say the buildings need windows, understand? All right, so would that be a project, say you pick and earmark that money from that fund, the 1.5?
I think that we would look at the totality of what we needed the schools, and as Ms. Dippold had indicated, we would, first look to the special purpose stabilization fund for the schools for that money. And then we would still be looking towards the capital stabilization fund for, any amounts over the 1.5 of that window project that you're raising hypothetically costs, or additional items that we feel are necessary improvements. Again, just to So to give you an idea, we're talking about a $2 million capital stabilization fund that we, as Ms. Dipple indicated, request, anywhere from $1 to $1.3 million from every year for capital improvements to the schools. What we're looking for here is to get a fund where we can start to direct our request to that first, but also gain money by also making requests against the capital stabilization fund. Obviously, it wouldn't be as much, the request wouldn't be as heavy. We'd be relieving some of the pressure from the capital stabilization fund, but we'd be able to, idea is to basically to catapult the R&M issues at the schools. So right now, we're basically treading water, Mr. Grady, correct, right? So like, we're basically, putting Band-Aids where we can, and just basically addressing the most exigent sort of needs that we can, but with the stabilization fund, we're looking to supplement the money we get from, that we would be getting from capital stabilization in order to sort of start to put the schools over the hump in terms of maintenance, stop this deferred maintenance, and start being more proactive with our buildings and our capital assets.
Diane?
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking out loud, but I definitely think the conversation needs to take place as we go towards town meeting, whether it's crafting a policy or not, because I think to the extent that we're able to delineate it a little bit so that, the capital stabilization fund that's for the schools is for critical building and infrastructure needs. So it's not necessarily the buses. Because you're gonna go to the capital, stabilization fund for the bus, or
That's
there's
right.
a way to kind
Like a
of
recurring.
earmark kind of what's going there first, because I think that's gonna help you out in the long run in terms of the requests.
Sure, more operational costs.
I would agree, because if that's going up and over what you're getting now, and it's 1.5, that it really would have to be defined as to where those monies are going. And
I think you're right. I think, and that for that reason, I think it's structured in a way where we would, once the money is allocated, we would have to, I think, detail through the same process what the requests are and what the actual appropriations would be if we're looking to actually spend the money. So we'd have the $1.5 million. We wouldn't be able to use a cent of it without getting it approved by the town for the specific purpose.
I'm sorry, Craig, isn't it make almost more sense to continue with getting your regular budget stuff, get care of your stuff, and then the stabilization fund, is that above and beyond for the major long term?
Either way, I think just as long as we're getting additional funds so that we're basically, because what happens every year, right? We go to capital and we're, I don't want to say fighting, but we're exactly, we're competing with every other department in town. And that's just the way it is. It's just one pool right now. So we're looking for an additional pool that only the schools have the right to ask for money from, so that we're able to start to win the battle of R&M with our.
I think one of the principles here and with you and everybody else is underneath this, there's no magic funding. These are going to require some kind of varieties of tax increases. So if we're going to do a tax increase, it's more palatable if we tie it to actual capital long-term improvements rather than day-to-day maintenance. That's almost how
I think you're right, and one point is that this a good portion of the stabilization, the special purpose stabilization fund will be sort of offset. The increase in taxes resulting from it would sort of be offset because some excluded debt would be coming to an end that's school related. So that tax increase associated with that will be going away and they'll be sort of replaced with this, which makes complete fiscal sense.
And Mr. Chairman, if I may, I just want to echo my agreement with your characterization of how we would use this. We would continue our standard capital request process for our day-to-day regular needs as we have been doing for the last year and the year before that. The special stabilization fund would be an additional source of funding where we could say, for example, request funding to replace the asphalt on one of the roofs over the gymnasium, which is a $400,000 expenditure. So what we're able to do with this special stabilization fund is start to look at these needs and think strategically about how we address them without being caught in the quagmire of competing for capital allocations for our daily needs. That process would remain unchanged. This special stabilization fund would allow us an additional flexibility. That's why I think this is such a critical tool for our schools in the current condition that they are in.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
actually, that makes a point for me to reiterate if I could. I think Chairman Dial put it well. But really, we have a situation where we have normal every year capital requests, such as asphalt roads and sidewalks being resurfaced, replacement of iPads, technology, and then we have, for instance, $8 million, just under that AI3 pointed out, for our roof of our middle high school alone. So it just gives you, and there's many, many more issues that were pointed out by that. So there really are two purposes here. So I just want to reiterate exactly what Chairman Dow said. Sorry about my dog.
Thank you. Other select board? So my sense is, well, how do we feel? Do we want to?
Stuart?
Yeah.
Stuart.
Yeah, I would make a motion that we draft a warrant article under the applicable mass law for a special stabilization fund of 1.5 million. For the school-
Second,
for the schools in terms of the capital costs, and that we flesh out the policy implications over the next 30 or 70 days, as the case may be, if we decide to extend that town meeting or election day.
How would we put that in?
Okay, let me clean up. I will move to direct Mr. Senior, with the help of council, to draft a warrant article for a $1.5 million special stabilization fund for the school's capital needs.
Okay.
I second.
All right, we have a motion made and seconded that we direct town manager senior in conjunction with town council to craft a 1.5 million special stability fund for the schools. The motion is made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions, motion carries unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman. And Superintendent Sullivan.
Thank you. There is, Mr. Creighton, the one issue outstanding from the school facilities committee, which is the request for a warrant article for the $1.5 million feasibility study for the middle high school. Now, I don't, the school facilities committee as an independent entity and duly formed committee has voted on and requested this and carried it through advisory and capital, which I don't know for certain, but from my interactions with them, I'm fairly certain that they do not support. But nevertheless, it's important, I think, to that committee that it is considered. And the reason for that, I just want to reiterate, is we're not asking for any group to approve $1.5 million. We're asking for the community to be confronted with the issue and to have the discussion in town meeting about the merits of the feasibility study for the middle high school. And that arises from that existing condition study that identifies major deficiencies, both from aesthetic, structural, and programming needs within that building. So we know that in the not too distant future, we'll need to address these issues with a major overhaul project, whether that's replacement or renovation, is yet to be seen, and that's why we would want a feasibility study to outfit the town with more information regarding that. Now, simultaneously, there's an MSBA process going on where we would need to engage in a feasibility study if we were ever invited to that core program that we're applying to. And we've applied to it once, as you know, we were not invited. We're applying to it again, and we'll apply to it again until we're invited. But and while it's possible, certainly, that there would be some duplicative spending if we were to do our own feasibility
You're
study.
asking for 1.5 for the.
1.5, yes, and it's possible to be some duplicative spending there. It's equally possible that that we won't be invited to the MSBA's core program and the near future. We have to apply time and time again, and it's also objectively true that schools aren't built overnight. So what we're trying to do is just be just offer a proactive solution or a proactive option to the town so that we can maybe take parallel paths.
Who is we?
The school facilities committee.
So, and they would admit, on your proposal, you would propose that they would administer and decide. And they would select who does this study,
It would be put out to bid just like any other
but
project.
you would be the determinant.
The committee I serve on would
right.
absolutely have the
Clear.
town ask for, yeah, exactly. We would put the project out to bid. And I also want to say this, even if this is funded, yes, tomorrow, which we all know it's not going to be, but if it was funded tomorrow, it would still take a few months before the project is put out to bid and we decided, which professionals we're going to engage to do it. So by the time it actually starts, we won't be too far into it before we hear from the MSBA on the second round application. So we would start with those elements that we know can be repurposed to a future MSBA feasibility study as to mitigate duplicative spending. And if we're not selected, we find that out in December. If we're not selected, then even more reason to have this belt and suspenders approach so that we can, try and plan appropriately for the future and just arm the town with a little bit of more information. And again, we're not asking this board or any other board to approve an expenditure. We're just asking to have the community consider all the arguments. There's arguments in favor, there's arguments against, and then make a decision as a community about the most widely used community building in town.
Comments from the select board? I'm gonna.
Just a question, because I forget more than I ever know. Is there already a request that's being entertained, or have we put this article on the warrant already? And it's, where is this in terms of the capital budget and advisory deliberations? I know it was presented to us a few weeks ago.
Been presented, there's nothing officially on the warrant.
Okay,
The conversation. The committee has presented before, Ms. McCollum presented along with committee to advisory head capital. I do not believe that either of them will vote on anything yet. But no one has heard the proposal yet that you voted on tonight. That's gonna go to them starting tomorrow.
so, it seems like so much money to me, so I would ask that maybe we have a formal proposal, a formal request. I know you've requested it, but like, what is actually $1.5 million that we're gonna have to do a debt exclusion on is a huge amount of money. And I know studies are not inexpensive. But I'd like to see what that means. Can we do a study and get caught up for $600,000? Why is it $1.5 million? And is that just? Anyway, if I could see something more formal,
Justin, is there somebody? Who is it?
There is, Mr. Chair, we have a question from Chris Pratt, 265 King Street, which I.
Okay, I just want to make sure the select board has a chance to
Thanks,
weigh in
yeah.
first. Select board comments, Cory?
So, so just for full disclosure, right, I come from having 2 young kids that will benefit from a school project. And, the right age that will be there. And to me, I think the whole project is something that needs to be done. So I come from this perspective and I've had a lot of conversations about what's the best chance for success. I think from a strategy point of view, it makes more sense for us to prioritize the needs of the facilities right now with the fund. Buy ourselves a little more time with MSBA. If we don't get into MSBA for 2 years and we're spending money on capital expenditures, then we can have the conversation with the town to say, listen, we've done all the band-aids we can, it's time for the big ask. I worry that bringing this to town meeting without the full support of the relevant committees, town meeting goes sideways on us, and we've seen that before. We had very common sense zoning articles that went really sideways on us. I don't want to see a funding for feasibility study lose a town meeting for. I think that would be, that would be, I don't want to say fatal, but it would set us back a long time. I think it would hurt the credibility of the facilities committee, it would hurt the credibility of this committee if there was a sense at town meeting that we were trying to get something by them and they voted against it. So for me, I would be more comfortable not putting on this warrant, waiting for those other things to line up. That way, when we get it on, it's got all the support it needs and all the questions we need to answer.
Other comments from the select board?
Just
Diane?
a question on the timing last fall of the MSBA decision and town meeting, special town meeting. They both came within weeks of each other, right?
Yeah, we'd heard, I think we would hear before special, right? Is what happened last time.
But we would need to,
Ish.
you know, I'm thinking, yeah, okay, this is something we can just kind of push off until. Are we gonna have a sense next December? Of our likelihood of success with MSBA,
We'll know whether we're invited.
but in enough time to craft well, if we think we're not gonna be invited again. And then the urgency is getting greater, you know, to actually start the planning process, which isn't overnight.
Gene, and then we have somebody from the audience, Mr. Pratt.
So the short answer is no. If we do an early December town meeting, we didn't know from MSBA last year until December 21st.
And you didn't
And
know.
you didn't get any hints at a time,
No.
it was just. You know, so if we don't do it now, we're looking at next year. One of my concerns is that. Given that we're asking the town to make some big investments in the capital maintenance of our schools through the stabilization fund. For things like, for example, a roof. It would be helpful to understand and have some concept of. Are we going to be doing a renovation? Should we be putting a new roof on our middle high school if we're just gonna rip off the roof or renovate a part of it? And that's where a feasibility study is attractive to me in terms of, particularly on the renovation side. Can we get a sense of a real plan, both from a construction and a financial standpoint? I would be interested in a feasibility study that also looks at the finances of a new school and helps us come up with a realistic number, particularly with the middle high school, because I think that's where the money is likely to be spent. That's where we're applying with MSBA. And so I think that, you know, we have a bunch of things coming to a head right now, and I'm concerned that if we wait to do sort of the factual analysis and the financial analysis for effectively another year, then we're really coming to that crunch time on the timeline. And so maybe there is room for a feasibility study, but I think that maybe I'm just trying to figure out if there's a compromise where, you know, we could look at a feasibility study that gives us valuable information regardless of the MSBA, including as it relates to capital maintenance and on the financial question, which even if we get invited into the MSBA program, we're still going to have to answer that question on the finances. And so if we can make headway on understanding that sooner rather than later, and what we can get for the amount of money we can realistically spend, then I think that is something that would be very valuable to us. Because as Mr. Pratt's question reveals, people are going to be asking, what's the stabilization fund? How does this relate to all this other work happening in parallel? And so I think we have to be able to harmonize these two work streams.
And I think that is part of where I was coming from is, you know, is 1.5 is a lot of money, because now we're talking $3 million of a debt exclusion. So is there a feasibility study or some first step that can actually maybe not be duplicative or anti whatever MSBA is going to ask us, but is actually going to start piecing together some of the planning and help us get along and say, you know what, actually, it doesn't matter, you're going to need a new roof because no matter what happens, a new school or a big renovation is going to take so long. I mean, that's what happened to town hall. I mean, we kept saying, you know, we got to get it over the finish line, so we're not going to do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and now it's a disaster zone, frankly. So anyway, that's kind of where I'm coming from. Is there some piece that is not 1.5?
I want to get Mr. Pratt to speak, but there have been some discussions, and one of the kind of middle ground was not really having an evaluation, have a critical infrastructural analysis done for a lot less money to basically be the middle ground that you're talking about, to evaluate the critical infrastructure without going into a full-blown thing, and I think we do that for less money. Anyway, Mr. Pratt has been patiently waiting.
I have a
Justin.
follow-up to that.
Sure, I'll bring that, Chris Pratt, 265 King Street, from the school committee's perspective, if the fund is approved and used in future years, how does this change the discussion and planning for a new school?
I can speak to that quickly, just about the, if I could, remember that the AI3 report was for all schools. And even if you look at Deer Hill and Osgood, Deer Hill has about $14 million on the high end, according to AI3, in repairs needed. And Osgood has about 12 million. That's over the next 7 years. So those needs are definitely there. And that is obviously separated from the middle high school, which is where we'd have the new school or renovation project.
And if I may offer I think the committee has not, this is a new fund, so the committee has not discussed and voted on this as a committee, but I can tell you from a personal perspective, as the committee chair, the way I think this interacts is this feasibility study is information. It gives us a roadmap as to how we can spend the resources we have available to us in view of the extensive capital needs that we have. And it's almost it's very important for us to be able to understand how this all fits together. So if we have the feasibility study can tell us what we can afford and what it should look like, and whether a renovation is needed or whether something bigger is needed. And in the interim, we have leaking roofs, we have sidewalks to replace, and this feasibility study would give us a roadmap to ensure that we're not devoting precious capital to projects that may become redundant and unnecessary. And so this, in my view, and the way these relate, is it gives us a tool, a vision for responsible financial planning, both with the new stability fund and with our traditional capital requests.
Well,
Good question. So this feasibility study, is that baked in number 1.5 million?
Can you repeat that, please, Mr. Grady?
1.5 million for a feasibility study, is that a baked in number?
That was an estimated figure from the design firm that conducted the existing conditions study, because they do this for a living. So I asked for an estimate, and it seemed likely that it could be completed within that, like under that, and that's why they were giving us an estimate that we wouldn't exceed. To Mrs. Kennedy's point, I think it would be very prudent to even, go with half of that or something. Because if you think of the timing, right, we would get the information we need, because by the next town meeting, if it was going in a direction where we thought, well, we need to complete the rest of it, then we could put the rest of it on the next town meeting if we didn't want to commit to the whole 1.5 now. But at least if we were to fund a significant amount of it, we could start with major elements of that feasibility study, or whatever you want to call it, that would likely be repurposed to any feasibility study, whether it was the MSBA inviting us to their project, or if we were doing it our own one day, or if there was just, who knows what would happen, but we need to conduct the study first. So I think that there's some wiggle room within the 1.5. That's sort of what you're asking. I think that, we could, I don't think we're not going in the feasibility study store and saying one feasibility study, please, and they're saying $1.5 million, please. It's going to be, it's piecemeal. So we're incurring these expenses as it progresses, and it just wouldn't progress that far. We'd probably get halfway through it by the next town meeting cycle.
Well, thank you for the answer. I was just asking a simple, easy question, so
we got a good. Corey?
I had a question.
Oh, go ahead. Well,
So what are the parameters inside this study? You guys, the school committee, come up with what you're looking for? I'm just curious as to, are we looking at rebuild, renovation, are all options on the table?
All options. It's to outfit the town with all the information necessary it'll make recommendations. It'll give us information so that we're able to make an informed decision about what's best for our community needs, our financial needs, our programming needs, our extracurricular needs, everything.
I'm gonna drill down a little more from your question, which is this $1.5 million study
I'll get you.
ballpark for all the schools, for all 4 or 3,
No, this is for the middle high school building.
just the middle high school?
Yes.
All right.
So if it is something that's got piecemeal, can we revise our previous ask for 1.5 for the thing? 2, are we allowed to, Jennifer, to, within that, part of the request for spatial stabilization could be the feasibility study, or the first phase of it, And then we just have an expectation that in 2 years, that $2 million fund will go back to 1.5. Where we say, okay, right now we're gonna overfund it. That way, I'm worried about having two asks for that. I really am. I think we lose. If we have two, it gets confusing, we lose. If we have one and we're clear about it, we're serious about it, I think it wins. So if we say, okay, we're gonna bump this to $2 million, it gives you $500,000 extra for your first phase. And then we say, after that feasibility study is done, after you've made conclusion, your MSBA's come in, we're gonna bring that down to 1.5. We're gonna give the taxpayers their money back once we figure out what to do with it. That way, it's just one thing. I mean, I think that's $2 million is a lot of money. It's gonna really impact people's wallets, but if this board thinks we need to do it, then I think that's the way.
Well, Jennifer, can you address that?
So the question is, can you use the money from the special stabilization fund for maintenance of the schools and the facilities?
Yes, if we so chose.
Yeah, if you structure the special stabilization fund as like school facility.
Sure. Okay.
So may I ask a question? So, Mr. Evans, I think that that's a great solution. And it's optimal because it sort of kills two birds with one stone, so to speak.
Yeah.
However, what I'm concerned about is if we don't make a decision now about the feasibility study, we come back because we have to make those specific requests about the specific expenditures. Once we have the fund in place, then we have to come back and get them approved. So now are we having the same debate that we're having now? You know, a few months from now, and people are thinking, well, maybe a feasibility study is not the right move. We don't get that request approved from the stabilization fund, and we actually can't spend the money on it.
The difference is, since we've already allocated, the voters already approved, I think it gives you more flexibility. I don't want to say it lowers the bar, but it allows you to have a much different conversation about that section of the fund. And if you are saying that, you know, I think to Paul's point where it's not $1.5 million a bust, you sound like you guys are really going to target this really carefully. And if that's the case, then if you've got a targeted phase one of this, I think that's an easy sell. And if we don't have to go back to the ballot, I think I think, again, I'm thinking about this as long-term success. I think that gets you on a path which gets you to success. And allowing you to do.
Okay, Greg, Jane and then Paul.
We're still confirming with the Massachusetts Department of Revenue, but we believe that we can, through this town meeting, vote to appropriate specific line items, through the stabilization fund.
Oh, cool, at the same time.
We could do it at
Nice.
the same time, contingent on the ballot. You know, we're asking our lawyers to confirm all, including how the ballot questions would be drafted. But we do think we can do it simultaneously if we wanted to start spending the fund immediately on certain line items. I think it might help to figure out with respect to what that line item is for the study, what exactly we are studying and asking, because I do think that, you know, there's going to be some back and forth. So if we can identify some items that I think will garner some, you know, some good support, including on the financial side and, you know, some of the tough questions on maintenance versus not, which I know is tricky because you're not looking at all the options, but I think that would be a good first step as we start to roll out more on.
Gene,
greater focus.
can you just ask a clarification about starting at the beginning, which is, I know we've got a time thing where we have to use it every year. So if we use it immediately, does that start that timer for that fund? Because I think Jennifer said if we don't allocate the full value, it drops down automatically. I'm just worried that.
The select board has to allocate it next year. We don't have to spend it within a year.
We have to allocate it. So, but then
We
it
don't have
starts.
to allocate.
Is the start date when we approve the fund, or is it when we do the first allocation of the fund?
So the first year is a little different than every subsequent year. So
That
the
makes sense.
first year, make a recommendation to town meeting on how much you want to fund it.
Yeah.
It goes to the ballot. The money goes into the special purpose stabilization fund. You can appropriate out of that the subsequent contingent on the ballot vote. And then in the next year, the select board decides how much money goes into the fund. But whenever you appropriate out of the fund, it's a town meeting vote.
I was asking about the mechanism that you said, that this fund, if we don't spend all 1.5, automatically, the amount we can appropriate reduces automatically. Is that? I thought that was what we were told
If
previously.
you picked it, one, they
Don't-
picked
you don't fund it.
Okay, my apologies. I misunderstood. I just understand all this stuff.
Okay.
Yes.
Paul,
I just have a question that kind of threw me, the feasibility study. So my antenna went up, you said it's just for the high school, middle school, high school. So what's gonna happen with Deer Hill and Osgood? Because, you know, I heard one of these gentlemen just mentioned $12 million for repairs or stuff. So when are those gonna, when are they gonna come up with that?
It's an excellent question. So the existing condition study that we had conducted identified those schools from a programming, structural, aesthetic perspective as functional and performing. So it's not, I don't think it to us, you know, and to the school facilities committee, to the school committee, that doesn't, it's not a pronounced repair, replacement, or major renovation or overhaul need. Those figures that you were hearing were over time maintenance expenditures that we expect to incur, not all up front. I think some of them, I'm not sure which time frame we were looking at with the numbers that were, I think Dr. Sullivan had mentioned
10 years.
10 years, so that's over a decade, all repair and maintenance costs for each of those buildings.
Yeah, my point was just simply that there, to Mr. Pratt's question, there are other needs that we will be using the stabilization fund for.
We have somebody from the audience.
You, Brian Host, Brian, you have your hand up, go ahead.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Got you now.
Great. I'd like to suggest that to keep this simple and less controversial, that we keep the maintenance and repair special purpose stabilization fund for exactly that. The extent that, you know, the school facilities committee wants to put forth, you know, their request for the feasibility separately, that it be separate. And the reason I'm making that suggestion is because I think you will find it almost universally supported that there are significant maintenance and repair investments that need to be made across all of our town buildings, but in particular the school buildings. I don't have a view on the 1.5 number because I've never heard that prior to tonight. But what I can tell you is that, you know, almost any number that you can imagine that we would fund on an annual basis, you know, can be put to good use. Maybe not within 12 months, but certainly over, you know, a decade long, you know, rolling period. Each of our buildings, I think the newest building in terms of the major renovations was the middle high school. The doors opened on that complete renovation in 2003. Maybe it was 2004 actually. So it's 19 years. Somewhere between 20 and 30 years, you know, you've got major systems and infrastructure that comes up for replacement. It reaches end of life. That would include roofs, HVAC systems, and, you know, certainly windows to some degree. And there are many others as well, but these are the big ticket items. So that's the youngest of our infrastructure. The other two school buildings were done in the 1990s, so they're a little bit further into that, you know, into that third decade. We've had placeholders on the capital budget request list or forecast list for years. You know, we under our new facilities team have increased the surveillance of the roofs and those systems to get a better understanding of when in fact they will reach end of life. I think we've been lucky that, you know, Nick and his team has rolled out a program that's both, you know, chased and eliminated a lot of leaks much more quickly than we had in the past, even when these buildings were younger, frankly. But also I think has given us sort of the benefit of some extra years of life out of these roofs as a result. But make no mistake, these expenses are coming. So the maintenance and repair special stabilization fund for the schools, I think is a pretty straightforward thing. I think that the feasibility study is a completely different animal. And I don't really want to get into that tonight, but I will simply, because this will go completely off track from an agenda perspective and a time perspective. But I do concur with the earlier comment that both the capital and based on my watch of the advisory committee, that, you know, this is going to be a very different discussion than basic maintenance and repair. And I would encourage the select board to watch those two meetings. There are YouTubes on both, and I think you'll find them very informative as to why this probably should not be lumped together. I will say that, if we, I can't speak for the committee, but I think it would be very problematic if people funded what they thought was a maintenance and repair program and found out that the money was used for feasibility instead. And the maintenance and repairs were not invested in aggressively. I will also tell you that in terms of the existing conditions report, capital budget passed that for special town meeting a year and a half ago with the intention of actually getting a detailed inventory of these maintenance and repairs across all three buildings that we would need to start to fund. So funding it is a logical next step. The problem I think that we have is that report was done and it was used to apply for a new school building. It was not used to actually earmark any new maintenance and repairs, nor did we see a request for funding come out of that study. So I think we're very interested in funding the maintenance repairs identified by that study and not seeing, at least that fund used some other way. So for those reasons, I would encourage you to keep these separate.
Thank you, Brian. Just for the record, so everybody knows, Brian Host is on the capital budget. Are you chair or just on?
I truly apologize. So Brian Host, 29 Heather Drive, Chairman Capital Budget Committee. But, speaking as simply one member of that committee, there has not been a vote on either of these items. And, some of what's being discussed tonight has not even been socialized with capital budget at this point in time. So I'm just sharing an early reaction to what I've heard tonight.
Thank you for the clarification. Did I see another from Diane or Paul? Corey? Jean? I have a comment. Yeah, I guess I would much rather see a straightforward analysis and building upon the analysis we've done earlier for a lot less money. I agree with Corey that we put too much of this together, it's just going to die. And my fear is it will kill both initiatives. However, I think a much smaller amount of $750,000 to evaluate some of the previous infrastructure analysis reports that we've had. I think that makes sense because people understand you're really looking at things so we can make a better decision, and we're building upon information that we've already gathered and paid for. But anyway, that's my Jean.
Yeah, I think before we start investing multiple millions in the school, I'd like to know some of our options. I'm open to hearing the best way to get there. MSBA may take 3 to 5 years. Our roofs are on a 1 to 3 year list of replacement. And so, again, I have some desire to get ahead of it. I would love for us to get into the MSBA program and to be able to have some of that funded. I'm just worried about the timing of all of this and making decisions we regret later on. And so I think to Jack's point, I would be open to something that helps us at a minimum address the short-term decisions and know some of the options maybe a little more. Perhaps some introductory items to help start this off and then go from there. And I think that, we all probably need more time, and we probably need to go back to the school facilities committee too, to help try to figure this out. I think, one thing that we, the select board, can do is try to look at all different funding sources, that are out there that we may be able to think through with respect to some of those feasibility study items as we move forward.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think my concern, if we put this at a ballot where it's a study, the Jack's point, I think it's problematic. I mean, if we are able to narrow down to the stuff that needs to happen, and we can find other ways to pay for it, it's not an exclusion. I think it's a better process. I think it's also got more chance for success.
Well, we're using the capital stabilization fund right now to pay for a public safety feasibility study. That's $200,000. That's probably gonna go on the warrant as we speak, and that's not a bad, use of money.
Right.
So do we want to, does the board, this gets to some resolution. Does the board want to spend some sum of money to get an evaluation? Rather, as opposed to the full board, or,
I don't think, how will we get that? He's coming to us with 1.5.
well, we can,
We could arbitrarily pick a number, but they've got to have some sort of, they've got to have a contract or a vendor that's gonna, agree
well,
with
we
that.
can,
Do a phase one or
Yeah.
what does
we
that
do
look
a
like?
phase one, we can say,
Phase one,
we will allocate so much money for them to figure out,
that I guess.
right?
I think that's prudent. I'm sure we could do that.
Yeah, I think you can, it shows some progress, but we don't want to hit the tripwire. If we hit the tripwire, both of them are gonna go down in flames, and Corey's got he's very accurate about that.
And I,
I-
yeah, and I think Brian, I mean, I was originally thinking, why don't we just do two and like put the study in there, but I think Brian makes a very good political point.
Yeah.
That if there's even a perceived completely different use or pork or whatever, somebody might make that case and it sinks everything, then, our goal is to get whatever we put on the warrant passed. Because if it's
Is
on the
there-
warrant, we believe in it.
Is there a sense in the board on the figure for, to differentiate it, we might want to call it a critical infrastructure analysis?
I would say, to Paul's point, if you can figure out a way to bring this, tighten this up, not tighten, I don't like that phrase. Give us another option. Do you think you can do that in the next week?
Yes, in anticipation of this sort of issue, we scheduled a meeting for tomorrow.
Correct.
All right,
So maybe like a 3 or 4 phase project, so Jim is to go to Jim.
I'm certain we can fashion a solution that would work.
There,
I'm certain we could fashion a solution that would work, that would mitigate duplicative spending, but would still yield some information as to avoid throwing good money after bad
yeah, and
on an aging building.
we don't want to, there are people who will, we want something that's realistic and is helpful. And it's clearly not the end of the road, but we want to keep moving down the road.
We can work with this.
And can I just throw out
Yeah.
one more thing? And I don't think whatever it is that you're gonna come back and ask for is for a critical infrastructure assessment. I think we've got that in that A3 report or whatever that report is. I think it's really what now? It's really laying kind of the pathway toward whatever it is, whether it's spending money to replace the roofs or not spending money to replace the roofs, because we know we're gonna have to do a more holistic.
I don't think we have to worry about semantics. The reason that terminology
Will it
is
not
used
read
is to clarify that we're taking factual things and putting it together. You can call it whatever you want, but it's just to kind of clarify and limit and say, build on information that we already have.
I think this-
Put it in a coherent form so people can understand it. Anyway, so the consent and Paul,
just last, to Diane's point, I've got to agree with my colleagues here. They're gonna want to see what money's being spent.
Yeah.
And again, you're putting a roof on. Is that roof necessary? Because we're gonna tear down the building. So those are the points you've got to look at.
Mhm.
And then that 1.5 that we're addressing critical needs that have to be addressed right now, for the safety of all the kids.
That's why we want to do it, exactly what you just described. We want the information so we know what we should do in terms of R&M and also what our long-term options are as a community in terms of whether it needs to be
So-
replaced or renovated or something like that.
so you'll figure out.
I'm
something
confident I can
tomorrow,
fashion a solution that would
and
be
we will Put it on our
acceptable.
agenda for the next. Tracy, make sure we get this on an agenda and make sure you get the information to us tomorrow, because time is not our friend.
I can do it by your next meeting, so
Okay.
I'm confident if you put us on the agenda next meeting, I'll do it.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you. Thank you for your time,
Thank
for
you.
your support.
I'm looking over my shoulder at Lance and.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Right. Roads and sidewalks, Paul, you wanna give us an idea of where you are on that?
Right now, I'm in a holding pattern. So we've sent out the poll, get the first meeting together. We had the results back in.
Yeah.
So I sent you mine, and I reached out to a few people, and just basically asked them to speed it up.
The one we want to call and said that capital is meeting tomorrow night. They normally meet on Wednesdays. So he wants to see what happens tomorrow, and then he'll know if they're gonna meet on Monday or Wednesday. He wants to do the opposite.
So we don't have a figure that we can discuss.
We'll try Thursday.
Okay, so, all right, so we don't have a figure we can do.
So after that, Jack, what we propose to do is set an agenda.
Okay.
Get people get moving, and then. Get the meeting agendas, then we will start working on there. You know, way of giving up the chores and getting out there, getting the job up there.
So we're really quite a ways away for asking for any particular sum of money or.
At this point, no, I don't think we will be, because we talked last week about up to what we had available, so we know we have to spend, then we have to sit down with Brian Host. Brian Host, I'm sorry, if you're still listening. Brian Joyce. And, you know, attack the items, and whether we rearrange his paving schedule, we don't know yet, but kind of like to speed it up so we can start seeing some projects start getting done.
Gene? Oh, okay. All right, so we have, no, we're not gonna make any action or vote on that tonight. Fields,
Mr. Chair, we do have a hand up in the audience on. Looks like Mr. Host has a hand up.
Mr. Okay,
Would you like to?
Yes.
Mr. Host, you have the floor.
Great. Brian Host, 29 Heather Drive, Chairman of the Capital Budget Committee. We do have this on our discussion for tomorrow evening at Capital Budget, but in terms of numbers, I would just float two numbers out there that you should start to think about. I'm not recommending or suggesting either one of them. But what we're hearing, at least preliminarily from Mr. Joyce, is that our annual road spend needs to be somewhere around $1 million. Historically, and in 2024, you know, the funding will be closer to 500. Okay, so roughly 200 comes from the state, 300 has been coming out of capital budget. So to get from 500 to $1 million is going to require 500,000. Okay, if that's the number, then that does not create any relief on the capital stabilization fund. It leaves the current run rate of 300,000 in there, which was, the fund was really never designed to handle that. I won't go back over the history, but it's part of what's creating the pressure. So 500 just to fill the gap. If you want to take the pressure off the regular capital appropriation, then you'd want to bump that up to 800 and pull the 300 out of capital. So those are the two numbers you should think about.
Brian, will you repeat that? The 800 what?
The 800, if you were to do 800, okay, plus the 200 from the state would get you to the full $1 million. Okay, that would relieve the capital stabilization fund from having to fund the 300 that we have been funding the past several years. And it would relieve the pressure that $300,000 spend created when it was dropped into the fund about 5 years ago.
There's another thing, now, is every cent of that 300 been spent, that comes yearly, is that spent yearly, or then they get allowed to accrue?
Yeah.
So it was, it's a great question. It was spent yearly for the first few years of the new program. So we set this in place, I don't know, it was probably around 20, I want to say it was 2017, 2018-ish. And for several years, we were spending, you know, the 300 out of capital plus the 200 from the state for a 500, you know, for a roughly $500 number each year, 500,000 number each year. When COVID hit, the ability to execute, you know, came to a halt. And the capital budget committee concluded that we should continue to fund the roads, because just because we weren't doing the roads doesn't mean that we didn't need to do some catch up. So we continued to fund even though roads were not getting resurfaced for several years. Last year, I think, was the first year of catch up. There are still accrued funds that are going to allow us to basically execute about $1 million worth of roads this year, even though capital is only going to throw in 300, it's standard 300,000. But this will be the end of of spending down the accrual on the catch up.
All right, so how much do we have right now? If say we wanted to, let's just say Elm Street, for instance. All right, how much do we have sitting right now in accrued funds?
Sitting right now in accrued funds, somewhere around $500,000. Okay, so that plus the $300,000 appropriation coming in fiscal 24, plus the $200,000 that we'll get from the state in 24 will allow us to do $1 million worth of roads in fiscal 24. So this coming year is taken care of from that perspective. But that, you know, that will not continue in fiscal 25. There's
No, that's where we'd be changing the funding sources.
correct.
So in my head is, do you try to create that fund now?
Yes.
You think so?
I do.
If the money's sitting there, we're already like not a year behind, but you could create the fund next year. You guys will have some of your work done. We'll have a little bit more documentation behind
We've
it.
got catch up to do. Well, there's a lot of.
No, but I'm saying, it sounds like we're having trouble spending the money fast enough, right? So we've accumulated.
We were, Corey, we're not anymore.
Oh, we are
What?
full caught up?
I
Okay.
don't think we'll have any problem spending that, do you?
Oh, okay, I mean, if we created this fund and we took another $1 million of spend to the town, would we be able to actually spend that? And understand that we have
No,
existing
we're
money.
getting 200,000 right now from the state. We bumped up to 8, that gives us $1 million a year. And we have $1 million right now, so we can earmark some projects. We got some, we have Elm Street. We can get some sidewalks done. I just think if we're gonna ask, we may as well ask now and get it. Build it up. It's nice to have.
I'm not sure we're getting that money from the state. I don't know where that,
It's the chapter 90.
Thanks, man.
I know it's the 200.
Yeah.
But where do we get the 800?
No, we're talking about what, if we start with stabilization.
All right, okay, so building the stabilization.
Building
fund.
stabilization, so, yeah.
If you want to motion that and draft one, I'll support that. I mean, for $1 million.
You do better motions than I do, because you always call me on my detail.
But the idea is, I think, if I understand Brian Host right, is it's $800,000.
Yeah, it would be, if we want to relieve pressure on capital budget.
But that doesn't cover anything new. So if we're trying to build sidewalks and stuff, we're already.
Yes,
Well, it covers
just-
an additional 500. It would-
But that's only if we take relief off the capital. Right?
It would, so relief off of capital is we take 300 from capital and we move it into the special stabilization
We
fund.
take 200.
Plus, we add another 500 in addition in the stabilization fund, which would make $800, 800,000. And then keep in mind, we get an extra 200 from the state, so we'd have a total of $1 million each year, moving the pre-existing 300 out of capital to give them $300,000 of push.
And it's a net $500,000.
It'd be an increase in 500
Okay,
per year.
Good luck making that.
I will make the motion.
I make a motion that, select board support.
No, I'm kidding.
Of a special stabilization fund for $800,000. And then $800,000 for the purposes of roads and sidewalks.
Very good.
Generally speaking.
You make yourself motion for it.
I was caught up in the math. The math was just too hard. It's
Second.
zeros.
Second, so,
Okay, Jennifer, what is your assessment
My assessment of what?
of the $800,000 for the stabilization fund to bring us up?
Well, now you're at 2.3 million, really an override, so if you're looking at tax impact, it'll probably be like between 531 and 664 a year on your taxes for a median house valuation of 992,000.
So Jennifer, for an $800,000 state road and sidewalk stabilization fund for median household, we're looking at 212. each
Right,
year. And then we add on to the
Yeah.
schools, and so then
We're
we're
already in the box.
613.
So we will fund this as automatically every year. We get this funded by the tax increase.
Yes.
Not automatically, the select board has to
Has to, yeah,
allocate.
Yeah, okay. Do we have a motion?
And a second.
And second,
All right. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Very good. All right. All right. Fields and recreation. We saw you sitting over there and you were very patient. Thank you.
So. We've gone back to the drawing board again, which is great.
We need everybody to identify for the record.
Tim Bernica, I am the chair of the Recreation Commission.
Okay, so, every week we learn a little bit more about what the community is looking for. For this purpose, this evening, we are looking at renovating the 6 tennis courts that are existing, renovating the retaining wall, fixing the drainage up there at Milliken Field. We've met with the tennis constituents. Everyone's very passionate about this project. We've been looking at it for over 5 years. This is something that everyone would like to see get over the finish line. We also have those pickleball enthusiasts, right? And while we decided not to build those courts today during phase 1, what we did look into is the modular pickleball scenario. And what we found is that we can place 2 modular pickleball courts in any area that meets, for 2, it would be 60 by 60. They lay down this sport court. They put portable nets. It's an 8-week lead time. There's a 15-year warranty on this sport court. And the cost is $40,000. The great thing about this sport court is it can be removed and replaced and placed somewhere else. So for instance, if we try it in a parking lot this summer, maybe it's up at the schools where there's not a lot of traffic in the summer. We try it up there and it's a success. Maybe we move it in here for the winter. I don't know what the answer is, but you know, there are solutions. It's modular, it's movable, and it would definitely support the people who would like pickleball.
I'm sorry. So we're gonna have 2 pickleballs in our historic auditorium.
we could.
We're doing with it. Right.
I know the emails I'm gonna get. Anyway, go ahead, sorry.
So the next part of phase 1 would be, again, the Deer Hill School. It's a natural grass renovation. It is for 1 multi-purpose field. It's renovating the softball diamond that's already there. It's adding athletic lighting, fencing, and also some drainage up there. We're looking to fund the lacrosse wall, solely the lacrosse wall, not everything that goes along with it. But the lacrosse wall has been something that's been requested for a number of years now. They're looking to put it at Sawyer Street. They've been before the Rec Commission prior and got,
I saw you mean Deer Hill or,
no, we're looking at Sawyer Street.
oh,
Yeah, library. And we're looking for the town just to purchase the wall itself, and the youth lacrosse organization would fund the rest with youth lacrosse or boosters or some other program. So the next step here would be to go for our recreational facility design. And that would incorporate the tennis courts, the Deer Hill School, and the lacrosse wall. It would be an existing condition survey, the geotechnical will be done, electrical, it's design development for bid documents. You'll get your construction documents and it'll bring us all through bidding. The price we got for that is $239,550. We were before CPC last night. We asked for funding. They agreed to fund $119,500, which leaves us holding another $120,000 to fund the design. In total, for the entire project through construction would be $3.1 million.
Of course, we have to fund the design prior to the construction. So we get a solid number. But that would be the total price for phase one of this project with everything we just spoke of.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Tennis courts,
Yes,
because I'm asking for someone, there's a couple of people asked me. That's taking them up and replacing them, making new
Yes.
tennis courts. That's
Complete-
what, so if everyone's
It's
listening to this meeting, and I think they are, I want them to be clear that.
it's everything. It's removing the fencing, the retaining wall, and we're even talking, we talked today with Activitas about removing the retaining wall and actually pushing it back a little bit so there's additional space. And in between the courts, since there's 6, and it would be 3 courts on one side, 3 on the other side, in between would be almost a bullpen for the coaches to be able to coach, because right now they're behind the retaining wall with parents and it doesn't really work out for them. So that would be the best solution.
These big year discussions, so.
Comments from the board? Or
So-
I hate to harp on the lacrosse ball because it's like debated on exists at this point. I was thinking of it Deer Hill because then kids could use it for recess and it's right next to the new lacrosse field. I'm sure you've talked about this, just. Cue me in on why Sawyer is the better location for it.
So youth lacrosse made an argument to have it at Sawyer because it's a well-lit, well-attended area.
If that's something
Um,
different. Sure. That's all for me.
Safety, yeah.
Okay, and then, I'm cognizant of whichever, I mean, I think we have to have a needs conversation with this. I mean, we're already asking for a lot of money, so, I think that. I'm just worried that, I don't want to trim this down any further, but I'm sensitive to how much money we're spending already, so,
So I think, if I could
Yes.
respond to you, so what? One way to approach this, a debt exclusion, that would be starting at the height of $58 a year and then moving down. Because it's a debt exclusion, not a stabilization.
yeah, exactly, well, but, yeah, no, you're exactly, it would be a much smaller dollar figure per year, for sure.
discussion, Diane?
Just so what would be the ask right now? Is it the 3.9 or is it? the-
I think it's the whole ask right now.
I heard it was 3-1.
Is it 3-1 or?
315.
Sorry,
Oh,
okay, sorry.
Have we heard from any of the residents on the hill about the lights? I mean, I do know that the Hill residents were upset about Alumni Field back in the day. I'm a little bit concerned about. Not about hurting real work because of, maybe a group of people that could have been blindsided by this.
Sure. So part of this process would be to have a public forum leading up to town meeting. And will involve all the neighbors.
I think that's important because I have gotten some emails on that. And they're clearly. They feel like it came out of nowhere. We know that frequently that's not the case, but they feel that way. So we should definitely, Justin can do some outreach.
Yeah, I just want to put a pin in the lights, and it's not because I'm against lights, but it's a sixth of this project is to light the fields up there. And I just think we need to understand that but to me, it's a huge cost for an incremental extension of the use of those fields. And, I know with the Barnes Field lights going in, I mean, that's going to significantly impact them because it's a very specific sport, but it ultimately is only extending, the day that these fields get used by an hour or two for a couple months of the year. And I think for it to be 1/6 of the cost is a lot.
Well,
I rather disagree with my colleagues here, is I think that the payback's tremendous. Making the town competitive again, people aren't going out of town to play games. People do the softball, baseballs, when we have a Plymouth, or red lights. So I think the payback in the town's kind of here, like, it's just preschool aspect of competitive sporting. So I am for the lights, let's say that.
Jane,
Yeah, one thing that the study that we commissioned that town meeting approved showed was that we could get a lot more field usage. Because keep in mind too, that when you're playing some of these games, you're playing them at night because that's when parents are home and they can take their kids to the games and just creates more availability, and Deer Hill is a particularly good place because it's, if you do, I invite anyone to drive past it right now, it's completely lit up. Because the parking lot is completely lit up for safety reasons and for so you're not gonna have a similar calculus of like, you know, like a completely not already lit area. And so we get a lot of cost efficiencies from lighting it, even though I hear you that like, you look at the cost and you're like, oh, but if we had to make a new field to try to get what we could get through the increased field usage, and that would allow us to have gains at that time period. It would just be very difficult. We've looked at a ton of options, including trying to, you know, light places up in like essentially a forest, and it's just cost prohibitive.
Just a question on the lights. Do we have like a schematic? Are they, so each field is gonna have lights, the softball field at Deer Hill and the.
So it would. Yes, and it would just be around the perimeter. So it wouldn't be specific to softball specific, it would be around the perimeter. And, you know, they would be on a timer and they would automatically shut off at the time designated, and recreation would have control of that.
And just to add on to the issue about the cost, I mean, we're gonna bid out each of these items separately to try to get the best price we can for the lights, for the field, for the tennis courts. You know, to see if we can, again, try to benefit from some cost savings there, but we also have Activitas's estimate, so we have to go with it.
Yeah, it seems super high.
Other comments? What's the sense of the board on this?
Just, I mean, do we have a sense, I mean, kind of to build off these two not competing additive viewpoints, there we go. Have we heard, and thank you for coming from the rec commission's perspective, so, I mean, is there already a use case where you say, yeah, if we've got these lights, we can do this with the lacrosse team, we can do this, just so we can make it clear to the residents that, yeah, there's absolutely a need for use of these. I mean, CYBSA did that, they gave us literally really just clear numbers about what they could do. We have that, so if we do enter into conversation, we can talk about that.
Well, we've got Activitas's report. That was kind of the initial go around with Activitas was, can you please take a look, you know, do a needs assessment, like
Right.
what have we got and what do we need? And they have a pretty extensive breakdown.
I mean, just kind of more casually from the rec commission's point of view, is this something that you say, yeah, this is gonna be great for our programs because of X?
Yes,
Okay.
that's how we felt about it. We feel that this is a needed program to extend, you know, to extend, I guess, the season possibly, and the actual, you know, daily usage of each one of these fields to sort of, part of what we learned in the Activitas study was the amount of wear and tear. You can kind of like guess, oh yeah, you know, the Milliken is busy from, you know, 8 to 4 every single Saturday in the spring. But until you actually have somebody come in and give you, okay, hey, this is how we do, this is how we factor what the usage should be. This is the kind of maintenance program you should have for this amount of usage. When we saw those numbers, it was pretty clear. I think, and I don't have the report in front of me, but I think it was something on the order of, you know, we could use 17 more fields. Some number like that, you know, so now, okay, cut it by 2/3, cut it by 3/4 if you want, and you still got that need. And I think that's kind of what spoke to us. And it was the idea that if we can, you know, this is not, I'm not gonna say this is a, you know, minimal cost to extend a program, a reasonable cost, I guess we'll call it, because that's what things cost. We were 100% in.
Yeah, I think that's where kind of this conversation hinges. I mean, if you're a group and you said like this is programming, we need it, we're gonna run it, we're gonna do it. I think we've got a really good.
Well,
success.
just the one thing that should be stated is rec doesn't run any of these programs. So like we don't run Cohasset Youth Lacrosse
Right.
or you know, CYBSA. So there are all these outside agencies. We absolutely use the field, particularly in the summertime for our playground, our summer playground program.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's very, very busy during the day for us and critical for us, really. But in terms of, you know, can I say that there's going to be, you know, 30 teams in town of, you know, six-year-old lacrosse players? I don't know that. Just like I don't know how many baseball players there are. You know, we have estimates, just like anybody, we have estimates. We can go and look at, you know, birth records, if you want to like.
Well, I guess I'm trying to like back to this.
How they do the
It's-
school
it's the-
population trends.
It's
No,
like-
we can't like speak directly to it,
Yeah.
but we absolutely, you know, see from the data we've seen, there's a need.
Okay, because I think that's where it hinges. I mean, the nice to have versus the needs, and if we can accurately describe the need. Then I think we can have a good argument. If it feels like a nice to have, as I said earlier, town meeting goes sideways on us and stuff, that seems very easy to have. So if the rec commission is comfortable, or whatever groups you've put out, that this is a need, then, you know, I think we'll be fine.
So other comments, select board, or we think we're all kind of comfortable with this?
Yeah, so I just want to understand kind of the framework that we're discussing this in, like. Are we voting to put something on the warrant, or are we going to recommend something, which I'm uncomfortable doing, obviously, just because we haven't got an advisor and we don't have the language.
I think we're voting on crafting, just like we did.
And yeah, okay, and I think that the drafting of these articles are gonna be really important, especially,
That's right.
and the descriptors, because, you know, we are gonna have to make a distinction. We're talking about debt exclusions and we're talking about stabilization funds, which is a very different.
We will be, talk to Chris today, made it very clear, and town council is alerted that we do have drafting that needs to be done. Because we can't obviously,
There's certain language state law requires you to
Right.
have and use, and so we reached out to the council for that specific different language based on the funding.
On the warrant, and then it's the descriptor, and I'm saying this
Mm.
only because, again, I don't want things to go sideways. I want us to be as transparent and open, and I want us to be
But you're-
supportive of what
you're
we're
in
putting
favor of
forward.
this principle.
Absolutely.
So I would move to direct Mr. Senior to draft a warrant article for the Field and Rec project as described in the Cleary, up to the price of 3.154554 for a debt exclusion.
Yeah, motion made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye, opposed, abstention, motion carried. Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience. You keep this up and you could go on the select board.
I've been working on it for years.
Oh, all right, yeah. The pay is very good. All right. What do we have next on this? Is Justin, is Tom Callahan?
He is not able to come to that area.
Okay, I know that. All right, I'm gonna go to the Veterans Valor Act, South Shore Regional Vocational School Committee. Amend the regional agreement. Chris,
So, Mr. Chair, the board has been distributed information. The sum and substance of this is that the agreement is being updated to come to compliance with current state processes and standards for regional vocational schools. And the primary change is that Marshfield will be joining. This will allow Marshfield to join as a full member. That will mean one, that there'll be a better cost spread. So that will also mean potentially that all the current members might have less seats. Now, Cohasset has not reached its seated base allocation in many years. I think we have an allocation of something like 60, and at the moment we have 11 kids, which is more than last year. 11 going in fall. So the advisory did hear this and voted unanimously to recommend. And I talked to council there, she's fine with as far as I understand, with the language. So and again, you've heard from Superintendent Hickey that he presented.
right,
Move to amend Article 13.
discussion, second.
Just if we could have in voting to recommend, if we could have the advisory votes. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, I think it was 8-0, Tracy. Yeah,
Thank you.
because somebody was missing. It wasn't somebody who want to vote.
Thank you.
Is there a second?
I would second, although I would say, I think we need to talk about article placement later.
Move to recommend the South Shore Regional Vocational Technical Committee agreement amendment.
We have a second?
Okay.
Motion made and second, and all those in favor signify by saying aye.
I,
Opposed, abstention, motion carried. Yeah, and by the way, just Chris, we and the board, we are going to discuss later how where these get placed. Excellent point, Gene. Veterans Valor Act. The Veterans Valor Act basically says that veterans who live in town and own their own home can work off or they can do work for the town at minimum wage, and they can then take those hours and credit it towards the property tax bill at minimum wage, which is currently $15 an hour, a maximum of $1,500. And if they are incapable of working, somebody may work on their behalf. Is there any discussion on this?
move to recommend that the veterans now.
Second.
We have a motion made and seconded to recommend the Veterans Valor Act.
Just a question for discussion, because when we discussed it last time, we were thinking about capping it to
It's
10
capped
or
at
20
50.
people.
So, let me, first, the advisory committee voted unanimously to support this by a vote of 8-0, Tracy. Valerie, I believe it was 8-0, I was there, it was unanimous. We're proposing, we're drafting a plan for the select board, so that wouldn't be in the warrant article, all the warrant article does is authorize the town to accept the act and empower the select board to adopt the plan. The plan would then be to present you with one between now and town meeting, we would adopt it, be ready to go, you can talk about it.
So town meeting is only acting on us adopting that, and then we take it from there and build a.
Town meeting doesn't approve the plan, the select board.
Okay. Thank you.
And I'm waiting for input still from the veteran service officer and others, so that you will have a baked plan to be able to tell the town meeting what it is.
Is there any, we have a motion made in second on the Valor Act. Is there any further discussion? Hearing no further discussion, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstentions, motion carries unanimously.
We already did fields, of course.
Just field and courts will go before advisory, though.
Yes,
Someone to draft it there.
the ones in front of you tonight, Jack, are Articles 22, 23, and 26. The other three are being held pending for their conversations, which are happening tomorrow night.
22, 23, and 26, is what you just said.
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
they were all recommended by advisory by a vote of 8-0, and the planning board by a vote of 6-0.
Everybody had a chance to review these to their.
Yeah, I just want to pull up,
Just a quick-
Unfortunately, they're meeting from a zoning board, so every single person is currently. Who's been living this is in front of the zoning board. Unless someone's on, has someone joined us?
Chris, are you? Chris, are you sure it's not? That Articles 1, 3, and 6 that we were gonna focus on? I don't see an Article 1 here, so.
Well, it's Article 1 of the zoning, not the,
Oh,
right, that's, we have.
In disregard the arguments with the change.
Correct.
Yeah. So,
Well, so are we talking article zoning articles? or-
it's zoning article 3, zoning article 6, and zoning article 13. Is that correct, Tracy?
Not 13.
not
No.
13.
can we use them by their?
So what are we doing?
their
I'm sorry.
names?
So what are we?
Let's talk about the zoning article number, not
Yeah.
warrant.
Sign
zoning-
regulations, and establishment of zoning districts.
Yeah, thank you.
Is
What did you say, there's 3?
the, so we hold on 8, 12, and 2. Those are the zoning articles.
Okay, so we're doing 1, 3, and 6 now.
1, 3, and 6, 1 and 13 together.
Yeah, I
1,
see.
13, 3, and 6.
Thank you.
So,
Do we want to wait until chairman of the zoning bylaw can come before us? Is that feasible, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. You
Yeah.
can go another week or two
And is ZBA gonna vote on this?
on some of them.
They're before ZBA as we speak.
Well, that's what I'm saying, I do it for their recommendation, maybe our not easier.
Yeah, I think.
Yes, it is a lot
You
easier.
might want to.
And there are some unresolved issues with the zoning board of appeals, and we've been spending a lot of time going back and forth with the chairman of the zoning board of appeals, and he's involved his differences, and Tom Callahan, who's chairing the zoning bylaw committee, there's been a lot of stuff going on there. I think we're better off waiting until they resolve it.
You want to go 1 week or 2, just to be safe?
I think it'll be done in 1 week. If we have to put it off, but
We'll tentatively do it for next week and we'll see where.
Yeah.
There was, I mean, Tom did a great job in advisory, so, but, and there were a lot of really good questions, so I'd like
Yeah.
us to have the same opportunity to have that back
Yeah, sure.
discussion, because these are meaty and.
yeah, this has to do with height. This has to do with a lot of variety. It has to do with how high can a garage be and how close to a setback. And there's a lot of things. And I don't think we can do it justice without Tom here. Our town council, Chief Justice Judith Cutler, done a tremendous amount of work on this. But there's always the last minute interesting discussions that are going on. So anyway, we'll just put that off. Town manager update.
All right, so some more things with the warrant, just quickly. First, we're gonna re-add what was Article 1 last year. If you remember, we did a consolidated community recognition remembrance article. For at the top of the warrant, that's recognizing people who have retired, people who have passed, who are, significant members of the community of service, and recognizing retirees. So that's gonna be added. I'm sorry, we missed that one, but it will be there and it'll be full. And then to follow up, I had a conversation with Pratt today and also with council. So after that, the recommendation would be to have a proclamation in memory of Chief Naval Warfare Specialist Michael Lawrence Jr.
Right.
Right, it won't be an article. Because the select board has the authority to name anything it wants that which under its control, which is roads, which is where these are usually done. And they don't have a location anyway. So this would recognize him publicly at the meeting. And then the board at some later date, when there's a determination made.
So that doesn't, because we can actually have a square name down.
Yeah, they just don't know which one. So,
All right, so we're all, I just want to make sure we're all set with that.
yes, so this will both cover it publicly and also move the process, and the select board will be able to make that final determination. The other change is this that I'm asking for. So Chief Quigley and I came at length, and the board approved, the town meeting approved in December, the jointly negotiated request of Blue Cross Blue Shield Civil Service. However, the state legislature has gone into gridlock on approving home rule petitions to remove communities from civil service. That said, the rule is you go out the same way you came in. Cohasset 1928 did not request a home rule petition; they just voted to accept the law at the time. So other communities in similar situations have simply voted to say, we're leaving. So I sent to you an article that Carolyn drafted today for us that would supplement the other article. We're not going to ignore the home rule petition process, but we don't want to be dragged into any further delay, because as Chief Quigley has reminded us today, there's 5 holes at the moment. 3 are injuries, but there are going to be 2 for sure vacancies later this spring, and we're ready. We have an approved plan to start our own hiring process, and we want to do that. So
This has to go on the town.
yeah, so we put on the warrant, and it will just be an approval for town meeting to authorize the departure period. And again, I sent you a draft that Carolyn town council Murray drafted earlier. If you're okay, I'll have that on the draft warrant, and we'll run through the process. It's just
I think we get it. Are people clear?
I'm fine with it.
Yeah, fine with it. All right. Do we need a motion?
if you want to, just authorize me to put it on the warrant and we'll come back. It'll come back to you.
Motion authorize Chris to put the civil service act on the warrant.
Second.
Motion made and seconded, to put the civil service on the warrant. All those in favor up here, is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed, abstentions, motion carries unanimous.
And just one last thing, so is town hall conversation coming up at a future meeting to talk about putting that onto that package of stuff? You said,
We should do next week.
all right, again, whether it's because.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, I think we,
We got through a lot today.
what do we, yeah, because we obviously can't discuss. We want to discuss it next week. We have if people want to discuss it, we do have the ability to discussing.
has capital and advisory.
I think advisory, if I
They
believe
both,
that
they
they,
haven't
I
voted
think
yet.
advisory,
Because we haven't.
Yeah, so
I'm
capital,
not gonna say anything.
right, no, sorry, yeah, that's a good point.
Tracy, did capital, I mean, did
Hold on,
advisory?
let's do one person at a time.
Capital is scheduled to vote tomorrow night. And advisory is either voting tomorrow or next week, so you can have this teed up for either the 20th or 4th, depending on how the process goes.
Okay.
It's already on, I think you're planning to have on, I think, so.
Okay.
So just two other quick updates. I was at an MMA policy committee today, and the proposal to extend the current virtual meeting options, which is what we're functioning under right now, is part of the supplemental budget. It expires, the current rules expire on the 31st of this month. The expectation of MMA's lobbyists seem to be that it will happen shortly, could happen this week. They'll supplement the budget, and that this extension will hopefully be part of it, give us 2 full years. Unfortunately, there's still some bills kicking around that would really kind of gum the works up and require permanent hybrid meetings for every single committee, with 1/3 of the members present every single time. Somebody raised the point at the meeting, well, disability commissions and other communities are loving this rule because it's very hard to get people together, and this has greatly opened up the ability for people to work. So we're hoping some of these legislators who seem to be stuck in that world will not block this extension, but you'll know them. And then there is growing support for public facilities authority. There's a bill has been filed in the legislature again, in the House. And a series of mayors and other members of this commission, committee, like, we gotta get this done, we gotta get this done. So if there's opportunities for us to, the community to join that, I will let you know. But there seems to be an increasing demand from the communities in the state to say, look, we have the MSBA for schools. We actually have a library for the libraries. We need something like that to help communities do public safety, town halls, and DPWs. So I'm just letting you know, that's definitely taking on a larger voice at this point.
Does it have any possibility of being passed in any reasonable amount of time?
Well, June, I mean, I think June, the legislative session goes through June. So if the bills are filed, I haven't talked to Senator O'Connor, Representative Mosquito, by the way, do we want to get them in April? So those will be questions you can ask them, I think.
Well, it's obviously where we are.
Yeah.
It's of crucial importance. If there's some wonderful funding mechanism, we need it.
But just like MSB, it would also be competitive. So it's one of those things that I think, we're gonna need renovations at the police and fire station, clearly at some point down the road. And then same thing with DPW and even the senior centers, right? So to have a path for that years down the road, but it's not gonna happen today, but I'm just letting you know that it's.
Well, thank you for bringing that to
Do you have
us.
any information on who's taking the lead on that?
I do, I did speak sent over, and I don't have the names.
If you could send that to me.
I will.
Appreciate it, or all of us.
But we'll get Representative Skinner and Senator O'Connor. I
Yeah,
think once we're done with this, in April. I'll try to get-
okay, thank you. It's very helpful. Anything else?
Nope.
Select board comments, who wants to go first? Paul.
Looking forward to roads and sidewalks. The first meeting, I think it's gonna move pretty quickly. I'd like to thank Michelle. She worked awfully hard on the roads and sidewalks. I really would like to give her credit. She's done a yeoman's job. And it's nice to see something starting to approach the finish line, and I think it's gonna get a nice reception. And last but not least, how are we doing with the firemen?
April 4th.
April 4th?
That's the plan, is providing the
You
everyone's.
got your April. I'm gonna-
I know. I remember Justin doing a video. It's their 1-year anniversary. It's good. It's good.
No, thank you.
Give me a few days.
No, thank you. Do they know about it yet?
Yes, we'll work with.
That's
This is a
fantastic.
public meeting. Everybody knows everything.
Yes, we have told them it's not a surprise. They know that we're having a presentation.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Who wants to go next?
I'll just say that I was actually gonna ask about the hybrid expiration of remote meetings, so thank you for bringing that up. The elephant in the room obviously is the biggest capital project that we've been proposing for a long time, which is town hall, and I think we owe it to the process. Again, we owe it to our committees to have, so that they know what we're doing, that we're not backing off of this. We're just not having the conversation, but advisory is meeting tomorrow night. And they're meeting every week like we are during the season, and it's a lot, and, I think they need to know what they're supposed to be voting on before it gets too late, because it's just gonna take things sideways. We owe every project that we've been discussing, a real in-depth conversation. I understand all the crazy, I just understand how complex this is and has been, but let's really try to especially give guidance to our advisory committee and our capital committee as to what they're supposed to be looking at and budgeting or voting on, recommending to town meeting, and then talking about it as soon as we can.
Thank you, Diane. Corey.
I had a chat over Seabird coffee today with a friend of mine who's very much don't fund anything, cut everything. And it was a really entertaining conversation. He's a fun guy to chat to, but he's against kind of all spending in every way, shape, and form. But it was funny because as you talk through, well, what's important? Like I tried to have that conversation. Well, what's important to you? What about this? What about that? You started to get to the basis of what I referenced earlier, which is needs versus nice to haves. And I think the biggest difference between needs and nice to haves is needs don't go away, right? What's happening to the schools, that doesn't go away. What we need for roads, it doesn't go away. If we ignore it, it doesn't go away. And a nice to have is something, well, we could decide to do it later on and be fine or not, and we could find other ways, but a need is a need. And today we've already approved a lot of, Jennifer just said, was it $600 on the low side? For an average house, there's a lot of people that are coming up with multiple $1,000 tax increases we're asking for. And I just, from my perspective, and I hope I speak for the board, what we've done tonight is needs-based. These things don't go away. They're either hurting our community or they're going to cost us a lot more later on. We're taxing ourselves, right? With every single one of us is going to pay into that account. And most of us aren't going to be on this board, when that money's spent for 10 years from now. Or maybe someone wants to do it, Diane, and stay here for 12 years. But so we are voting selflessly. There's no, if Paul gets a road page, it doesn't come to Paul grading lane. Right? The discussions here, I really want people to understand, are based on their needs. And that's the thing that needs to drive every conversation. When we get to town meeting, we have to be clear that these are needs and not nice to haves. And I know it's a lot of money, but tonight we did that, and I'm proud of that.
Thank you, Corey. Jane?
I think we're all struggling because it is a lot of money that we're trying to push forward all at once, and it's all representative of things that probably should have been done in the past that we're now having to come to grips with as our deferred decisions, maintenance, capital are all on display, and it's going to be painful, but it's something that I think we all appreciate is just a part of the democratic process to try to push things forward and let people make decisions and try to give them the best information we can to make informed decisions. I am a little concerned about the economy and just from my background, the impact on consumers generally, because I do think people struggle to stay in a very expensive area of the country that is their home. And so I try to take that into account too, as we think about all of these needs and price increases while trying to address the long deferred decisions and capital maintenance, et cetera, in this town. So it's a tricky balance, and I think we just continue moving forward, and ultimately the voters will decide.
Thank you, Jean. And I'd really like to add to what Jean has to say. And I'd also, and speaking to our citizens at home, this board and the other boards and committees are very much aware of this. And to Jean's point about there are a lot of things that were, for one reason or another, were not probably properly funded, or things wear out. It's very difficult to assess those, to decide what's fair, to allocate the cost burden. But there are things that we are going to have to, as a town, spend. And I think that I can speak for certainly the select board, and again, all the boards and committees, they take this very seriously. Been working tirelessly. I could name probably 10 different town volunteer unpaid officials that I've spoken to in the past day and a half, and I know each and other members of our select board can say exactly the same thing. We're working very hard. We are going to get through this, but we are going to have to face this. We are going to have to make some hard allocation decisions. But I think it's also important that we all understand we have to share. And nobody's gonna get everything that they want. And people have to be aware that they have to allow other segments what is needed for them, to Corey's point, what's needed. And in return, what they're needed. And as a town, we will get through this, and I really, it is, being on the inside, it is so impressive to see citizens' democracy hard at work. That's very impressive. And on that, I would like a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
The motion to adjourn, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed?